My name's Matt. I'm 27, and I used to think that if I kept my head down, paid my dues, and didn't stir the pot, my family would eventually start seeing me as more than just the responsible one. You know, the fallback guy, the one who helps without being asked, who lends money just until Friday, who always shows up to fix whatever's broken but never gets invited to anything that's whole. I've spent most of my adult life trying to convince myself that this role, the quiet provider, was something to be proud of. And maybe it was. Until last month. It was a Wednesday evening. I remember because I'd just gotten back from a work trip, bag still at my feet, when I got the group text from my dad. Family dinner at 6. Be there. Big update. No punctuation. No please. Just a command, like always. I should have said no. Should have made up a meeting, or claimed I was still out of town. But instead, like I always did, I shoved my exhaustion down, threw on a clean shirt, and drove over to my parents' place. The usual suspects were there, Mom bustling in the kitchen like she was feeding royalty, Dad seated at the head of the table like a CEO, and my younger brother Jason slouched at the opposite end, scrolling through his phone like he was allergic to eye contact. Jason's 2 years younger than me, but you'd never guess it by the way he acts. The guy has this talent for doing the absolute least and still getting treated like a hero for breathing. Got kicked out of college twice. Burned through 3 jobs in a year. And somehow, every time he messes up, it becomes someone else's responsibility to catch him. Dinner started off as expected. Small talk about the neighbors, questions about my job that no one really listened to the answers for, and the usual praise session for Jason, who had apparently decided to take a break for his mental health. That's code for he quit his job again because he didn't like getting up before noon. I didn't say anything. I've learned that silence is safer than sarcasm in my family. Then, just as I was about to excuse myself for the night, my dad cleared his throat and gave Jason this little nod. Jason pocketed his phone and leaned back like he was about to drop some life-altering announcement. My stomach sank. So my dad began, stabbing a piece of chicken like it had wronged him. Your brother's moving in with you next week. The sentence dropped like a lead weight. I blinked. What? He needs space, Dad continued, like this had all been agreed upon already. Can't keep living here. It's not healthy for a grown man. And you've got that extra bedroom. Jason didn't even pretend to be surprised. He just smirked and said, try not to touch my stuff, all right? My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I set it down slowly, my heart thudding in my chest. You're sending him to live with me? You're single, my mom chimed in from the kitchen, not even turning around. You've got room. You work from home. You're always saying how quiet your apartment is. It's the perfect situation. That last part hit harder than they probably intended. I had mentioned how peaceful my place was, once, during a rare moment of vulnerability, and they'd taken that as a sign I was lonely. Not that I enjoyed my space, or that I'd worked hard to create it, but that I was somehow incomplete and in need of chaos. I already pay rent there, Jason added, as if that sealed the deal. Well, not yet. But I will once I get settled. The absurdity of it all was almost funny. Almost. But what really got me wasn't the decision itself. It was how matter-of-fact they all were about it. Like I didn't even need to be consulted. Like it wasn't my apartment, my lease, my life. I wasn't a person to them in that moment. Just a resource. A solution. A spare room with legs. I wanted to shout. To throw my napkin down and walk out. But instead, I just smiled. It was a small smile, tight-lipped and calm, the kind of smile you give someone right before you drop the floor out from under them. Because the truth they didn't know, the one I hadn't told anyone, was that I didn't live in that apartment anymore. I'd moved out last week. See, after the 3rd time my parents tried to guilt-trip me into giving Jason a small loan for his rent, I started thinking about how much of my life wasn't really mine. I had this realization at 2 a.m., sitting in my apartment while Jason crashed on my couch for just a weekend that had turned into 5 days. He'd eaten through my groceries, left dirty dishes in the sink, and invited some girl over who ended up stealing my earbuds. I remember looking around and wondering why I was living like this. Why I was constantly sacrificing my comfort so my brother could continue pretending adulthood was optional. I gave notice to my landlord the next morning. Found a smaller place on the other side of the city, quieter, cheaper, and completely mine. I didn't tell my family because I didn't want the lecture. And because I knew, deep down, they wouldn't notice I'd gone. So now, sitting at the dinner table with their grand announcement still hanging in the air, I just nodded. All right, I said, picking up my fork again. If that's what you think is best. Jason looked smug. My parents looked relieved. And I just ate the rest of my dinner in silence, thinking about how satisfying it was going to be when they finally tried to make that move. Because the lease? It wasn't in my name anymore. And the apartment? Completely empty. I'd even made sure to leave behind just enough furniture to make it look like someone still lived there, for now. They had no idea the entire plan was about to implode on them, and I wasn't going to lift a finger to stop it. Not this time. The fallout began 2 days later, quicker than I expected, honestly. I'd assumed Jason would spend a few more days loafing around our parents' house before finally lumbering over to his new kingdom, but apparently the idea of having a place of his own had ignited something in him. That, or Mom finally got tired of him using her yoga mat as a food tray. He called me first, around 11:30 a.m. I let it ring. Then again, 2 more times. Finally, a text popped up. "Hey, you got a spare key?" I ignored it. 3 hours later, I got another message. "We're outside. You're not here." Still didn't respond. I pictured him and Dad standing in the hallway of my old apartment, probably arguing about whose fault it was they didn't bring a key. The building has a secure front door and no intercom system, so unless someone lets you in, you're stuck outside. And I made very, very sure the property manager wouldn't be doing anyone any favors. By 6 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Dad. "Call me." Now, I waited. Didn't even open the message. 10 minutes later, I got another. "What is going on?" I finally responded. Just 2 words. "Ask Jason." No reply. Radio silence. The next morning, though, that's when it got really good. I was sipping coffee in my new place, curtains open to the quiet courtyard outside, when I got a call from an unfamiliar number. Normally, I'd ignore it. But curiosity got the better of me. "Hello? Is this Matthew Carson?" The voice asked. Firm, official, clipped. "Who's calling?" "This is Miranda from Oak Hill Residences Management. I have a situation involving your former unit. Are you still occupying the premises?" I grinned. "Nope. Moved out last week. Final walkthrough was completed, and lease was terminated. I have the signed release form if you need it." A pause. Then she said, "Interesting. Because 2 individuals are here right now insisting they live there. One claims to be your brother." "Yep," I said, leaning back. "That sounds about right." Another pause. "They say you gave them permission." I didn't laugh, not out loud. "Did they show a lease? Signed contract? Proof of residency?" "No. Just verbal claims." "Then I'd recommend calling the police," I said, still calm. "They're trespassing." The silence that followed was beautiful. "We'll handle it," she said tightly. "Thank you, Mr. Carson." That afternoon, my phone finally exploded. Missed calls from Dad. From Mom. Even Jason, who never calls, always prefers passive-aggressive texts. The voicemails were golden. First one from Dad. "What did you do? They're saying you're not the tenant anymore. How is that possible?" Next one. Mom, more panicked. "Matt, you didn't tell us you moved. Jason's stuck out here. The landlord says he has no right to be there. What's going on?" Then, the piece de resistance, Jason's voicemail, equal parts indignant and furious. "Dude, what's wrong, Tayo? You knew we were coming. You let me pack all my stuff and drive across town, and the place is empty. You took the couch? Seriously?" "Oh, right. I forgot to mention. I'd sold most of the furniture before leaving. The only thing I left behind was an ancient bookshelf with a busted leg, a plastic fork in the kitchen drawer, and a single sticky note on the fridge that said, 'Good luck.' I gave it 2 days before the storm hit face to face." Sure enough, Sunday dinner, the weekly family bonding obligation, was an ambush waiting to happen. I walked into my parents' house like nothing had happened. Greeted Mom with a kiss on the cheek, nodded to Dad, and even smiled at Jason, who looked like a man freshly evicted from a fantasy. He didn't speak, just glared. Dinner started quiet. Too quiet. You know that eerie calm before a fight breaks out? That was the vibe. It was Dad who cracked first. "Why didn't you tell us you moved?" he said, stabbing at his roast beef like it owed him money. I shrugged. "Didn't think anyone would care. You knew your brother was supposed to move in." "No," I said slowly, deliberately. "You decided my brother was supposed to move in. No one asked me." "He's your family," Mom snapped. "You had the space. What were you planning to do? Just let him be homeless?" Jason muttered, "You're such a selfish prick." That got me. Not because it hurt. I'd heard worse from him, but because of how entitled it was. Like I had wronged him by not letting him live rent-free in a place I no longer lived in. So I leaned back, set my fork down, and looked directly at him. You know, I used to wonder why you hated responsibility so much. Now I realize it's because no one ever made you feel the consequences. Oh, please, he scoffed. You think you're better than everyone just because you pay your bills on time? No, I said. I think I'm better than someone who waits until they're outside a locked door to ask where the key is. Dad slammed his napkin down. Enough. You should have told us. And you? I said, eyes on him, should have asked. But you don't ask me things. You assign me duties. You assume I'll just roll over and say yes. And you don't even thank me. You just move on to the next favor. Mom looked stunned. Jason muttered something under his breath. I didn't care. I moved, I said, voice calm. I didn't tell you because I didn't want the pressure. I didn't want the guilt. I didn't want to be used again. I needed a clean break. And if you think that's selfish, maybe take a look at what you were asking me to give up and who you were asking me to give it to. The room went silent. Even the air felt heavier. I stood up, folded my napkin, and looked around at the stunned faces. I'm not angry, but I'm done being your backup plan. Then I walked out. The silence after that dinner didn't last long. 3 days later, the group chat, normally used for birthday announcements and Mom's passive-aggressive reminders, lit up like a firework. Jason had gone off. The first message came in at 8:17 a.m., which for Jason was basically sunrise. Jason texted, "Wow, real classy, Matt. Kicking your own brother to the curb. I've been sleeping on the couch for a week." Mom texted, "Jason, keep this private. We can talk later." Jason texted, "No, they should all know. Matt's the golden boy until he's asked to do something real for this family." I didn't reply. Neither did Dad, not right away. I imagine he was letting the drama stew while drafting some sanctimonious speech in his head. But then, my cousin Laura, who usually stays out of the mess, chimed in. Laura texted, "You were asked to live rent-free in Matt's place and just assumed it would happen? He doesn't owe you that." Jason texted, "Stay out of it, Laura." Laura texted, "Just saying. If I were Matt, I'd be done too." I wish I could say the whole family backed me up like that, but Laura was the exception. Within an hour, I had 3 missed calls from my aunt, 1 from Grandma, and a barrage of messages from relatives I hadn't heard from since Dad's 60th birthday, all politely implying I should reconsider for the sake of peace. Peace. The same peace I'd spent years quietly buying with time, favors, and rent payments. The same peace I was now finally reclaiming. And they were furious I had the nerve to do it. I didn't answer anyone that day. I focused on work, on cleaning, on a grocery run that took way longer than it needed to. And that night, when I finally got back home, I found a letter. Not an email. A letter. Handwritten, folded once, tucked under my door like some kind of declaration of war. It was from Dad. No, dear Matt. No love, Dad. Just 2 pages of tightly written disappointment. How I had embarrassed the family. How Jason was going through a difficult time and I had kicked him while he was down. How I should have come to them first instead of making a scene. And at the end, "You're better than this." That line hit me in a weird way. Not because I believed it, but because it was such a manipulative little twist. The guilt grenade. A subtle attempt to reframe everything I did as cruel rather than necessary. Like I just lost my moral high ground by standing up for myself. I stared at the letter for a long time. Then I grabbed a pen, flipped the last page over, and wrote 3 words in the margin. I finally am. The next day, I dropped it in their mailbox. A few days after that, I found out Jason had tried to convince the apartment management to let him stay until things got sorted out. He claimed he had verbal permission and even tried showing them old photos of himself inside the unit, lounging on my couch like a king. It didn't work. The building had already rented the place to a new tenant, someone who was not thrilled to find Jason loitering in the stairwell like a moody raccoon. I didn't hear this from Jason, of course. He blocked me. I heard it from Miranda, the manager, who called me to give me the update, and ended the call with a dry, "Your brother isn't welcome on the premises anymore." I thanked her, and that was that. Until the family meeting. Yeah, that happened. Mom texted me that Sunday. "Dinner. Everyone's coming. It's time we all talked like adults." I almost didn't go. But a part of me, the stubborn part that had been sitting in silence for years, wanted to see their faces. To look them in the eyes, not with anger or bitterness, but with calm resolve. To show them I wasn't folding this time. So I went. Same house. Same kitchen. Same long oak dining table we'd gathered around every Thanksgiving since I was 10. Jason was already there, sitting stiffly at one end. He didn't look at me when I walked in. Dad was by the window, arms crossed. Mom was nervously slicing carrots she didn't need to slice. And 2 chairs had been set aside. One for me, one for the empty idea of obligation they still thought they could guilt me into honoring. Matt, Dad said the moment I walked in. Sit. I didn't. I want to say something first, I said. Just so we're clear before this turns into another intervention disguised as a meal. Mom looked up, startled. Dad raised an eyebrow. Jason, to his credit, kept his mouth shut. I'm not angry, I said. But I'm also not apologizing. I didn't betray anyone. I didn't sabotage Jason. I moved out because I needed space. And you decided, without asking, that I didn't deserve that space. You made your brother homeless, Mom said, softly but firmly. No, I said. He made himself homeless by assuming someone else's life was his to live in. Jason finally spoke. You could have warned me. I did, I said. When you were crashing on my couch and left pizza boxes on my bookshelf. When you walked around like you owned the place. When you never once said thank you. That was your warning. The room went still. And then Dad said the thing that changed everything. You used to be reliable. That one stung. Because it was true. I had been. And I finally understood why that word always felt like both a compliment and a curse. I stared at my dad for a few seconds after he said it. You used to be reliable. The words echoed in my chest, not because they surprised me, but because they confirmed what I'd been suspecting for years. I wasn't a son to him. I was a service. When the Wi-Fi broke, when someone needed help moving, when Jason needed bail money, when the mortgage was short, when the guest room needed painting, it was always me. Never once with a thank you. Never once with an ounce of respect. Just the expectation that I'd say sure and smile while doing it. I exhaled, sat down slowly, and looked at my father across the table. You're right, I said. I used to be reliable. Reliable like a spare tire. Reliable like the quiet background noise no one notices until it's gone. He narrowed his eyes. Don't twist my words. I'm not. I'm just saying I finally understand what you really meant by reliable. You meant convenient. Predictable. Silent. Mad. Mom tried to cut in, but I raised a hand gently. No, Mom. Please. Let me finish this, just once. She closed her mouth, but her eyes were pleading. Jason was still glaring at me, arms crossed, like this was a courtroom and he was the plaintiff. I moved out because I realized I wasn't living my own life. I was living everyone else's. Paying bills that weren't mine. Fixing problems I didn't create. Giving time I never got back. And every time I asked for a little space, a little respect, I was told I was being selfish. My voice cracked a little there, but I kept going. I let Jason stay with me even after he brought strangers into my apartment. I loaned him money even after he promised. 3 times, he'd pay me back and never did. And when I finally needed a break, when I decided to move and not tell anyone so I could breathe for a second, the first thing this family did was try to hand over my life to him again. Jason finally snapped. You think you're better than us now just because you moved into some tiny apartment across town? No, I said. I think I'm finally equal. Because for once, I made a choice that was about me. Not about patching your mistakes. Oh, grow up. No, you grow up, Jason. My tone sharpened, and he actually flinched. You're 25 years old and still act like the world owes you a soft place to land. You've never held a job for more than 6 months. You treat people like furniture, useful until they tell you no. And the worst part? You don't even realize how lucky you've been. Because if I'd behaved half as recklessly as you, Mom and Dad would have disowned me years ago. Jason started to say something, but I held up a hand again. And you know what? That's not even your fault. It's theirs. Now Dad sat up straighter. Excuse me. You made him this way. You protected him from every consequence, covered every mess, blamed everyone else for his mistakes, and used me as your solution. You told me it was my duty to help him, but you never once told him it was his duty to grow up. That's enough, Dad growled. No, I said calmly. Not yet. I turned to Mom. You once told me that Jason was going through a rough patch. You said it 3 years ago, and again 2 months ago. At what point does a patch stop being rough and just become the road? You told me I was the strong one, the dependable one. And you're right. But being strong doesn't mean being a doormat. She didn't answer. She just looked down at her lap. I stood up. I didn't come here to ask for an apology. I didn't even come to explain. I came to set a boundary. Jason scoffed. What are you, a therapist now? No, I said, turning to him one last time. Just someone who's done enabling you. Dad's face was red now, but he wasn't yelling. He was clenching his jaw, that silent kind of rage that used to scare me when I was younger. Not anymore. If you all want to pretend like I'm the villain for choosing peace, that's fine. I won't argue with you. But don't expect me to clean up this mess next time. Jason is not my responsibility. This family's problems are not my responsibility. And from now on, my silence won't be either. With that, I walked to the door. Matt, Mom called softly behind me. Please don't leave like this. I paused, hand on the doorknob. Then how should I leave? No one answered. So I walked out. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about it. It's been 6 months since that dinner. I haven't spoken to Jason. He moved in with some old friend of his, and last I heard, he got fired from yet another job and trashed the guy's place before skipping out. Apparently, he owes 2 months of rent and left behind a cat he borrowed from an ex-classic Jason. Dad sent me a single email 2 weeks after our blow-up. No subject line, just a brief message. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. I didn't reply. Mom calls occasionally. Mostly short, polite updates. She asks how I'm doing, tells me about cousins, then carefully avoids any mention of Jason. I think, maybe, she finally started realizing the difference between support and exploitation. As for me, I still live in that small apartment with the courtyard view. I replaced the old couch with a secondhand leather one, painted the walls a warm beige, and bought plants I actually remember to water. I started cooking again. I sleep through the night. I even adopted a rescue dog named Bruno. He's quiet, loyal, and the only roommate I've ever had who doesn't steal my food or crash on my couch for weeks. And you know what? I'm happy. Not the dramatic movie ending kind of happy. Just stable, peaceful, whole. Some nights, I think about how long I let myself stay in a role that hurt me, just because it felt familiar. About how many times I let silence buy me temporary peace at the cost of my own dignity. But then I remind myself, I changed the ending. I didn't just walk away. I closed the door, and I locked it.